Good evening, everyone. We're letting everyone get logged in here, and we'll get started in a second. Okay, it looks like our attendee additions to the webinar have slowed down a little bit, so go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly McAdoo, and I am the city manager for the city of Hayward. I'm joined tonight by our police chief, Tony Chaplin, our deputy police chief, Brian Matthews, and Officer Cassandra Favell. The other name you see is our Tim Loans, our IT support assistants this evening with the webinar. So, it will mostly be the chief, deputy chief, and I who will be facilitating this discussion. We wanted to welcome everyone here this evening, and this is the first of a couple of community meetings regarding recently passed legislation entitled AB 481, which we'll get into more details and describe in the presentation that we'll do this evening. So I just wanted to go over a little bit of the order of operations tonight. We're going to do hopefully a relatively brief overview of AB 481, which categorizes a number of equipment within the police department's inventory as military equipment and requires the city to go through a public process and adopt an ordinance to allow for the continued use of that equipment. So we'll share some details about the type of equipment that the police department has, and then review kind of the next steps in our process. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for public comments and questions to be answered. There is a Q&A feature, so if you have a question that comes up during the presentation and you don't want to lose it, feel free to just drop that in the Q&A. And we don't have a ton of attendees tonight, but we'll try to limit at least an initial round of public comments to three minutes per person, and then see if we have time for additional, as our former mayor used to say, second bites of the apple, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to our police chief first, Tony Chaplin, to get started and kick off the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, HPD's presentation, as the city manager said, is on AB 41 and will hopefully address the transparency issues regarding the funding, acquisition, and use of equipment that's been labeled as military equipment by our legislature. This equipment is, some of it we've had and utilized for 20 years, but it now requires the city council's approval to get funding for and acquire or use. And that's why we're here tonight. As part of that process is to come to our public and explain to them what these items in our PD are. And this was done at the state level, and it puts the burden on local city and county governments to monitor and annually track the police department's purchase and use of this equipment. So presenting for you tonight is going to be Deputy Chief Brian Matthews, who was a member of our SRU team, our Special Response Unit team. He also was a team leader, so I couldn't think of anybody more appropriate to do the presentation and to fill questions about this equipment, how it's been used historically, and how long we've had some of it. And so with that, I will pass the baton to Brian and my Deputy Chief, Brian Matthews. And Brian, you're up.
All right, thank you, Chief. And thank you, City Manager McAdoo. I'm going to try and share my screen here so that I can do this PowerPoint. Everybody see that okay?
We got you, yes.
Yep, it's not in slideshow mode yet, but it's up on the screen. There we go.
There you go.
All right, you got the big version. Okay, as the Chief and City Manager said, we're going to have a conversation tonight about AB 481. What we're going to do is cover just a brief background. I won't get into all of the details of the bill. I know we're going to have those conversations with the City Council, and I have had some in a work session already, but we'll touch on the background of the bill, and then we'll get into what our discussion tonight is going to be about, and that's the HPD equipment list, what we have in our inventory that's responsive to the bill, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. So in terms of background for AB 481, It went into effect January 1, 2022, and the intended purpose was to address transparency issues regarding the funding, acquisition, and use of military equipment. So the bill itself has a specific list of items which the lawmakers have deemed to be military equipment, and that's codified in California Government Code Section 7070 and through 7075. There are 14 specific categories and kind of one generic catch-all category that are listed in the bill. We'll cover each of those because I think one of the misconceptions that exist out there is that the HPD or police departments in general are in possession of a lot of these items that are listed in the bill. That's not the case. We do have some of the items listed in it. They have been in our inventory for a year. We want to stress that this is not a process by which we're asking for any new military equipment. This is all stuff that we've had in our inventory for years, at least the 23 years that I've been here. So we'll get into the equipment itself. I'm going to start by just kind of highlighting some of the things that we do not have, nor have we ever asked for, nor will we seek to obtain. We don't have anything in the way of Humvees. We don't have vehicles with breaching equipment, tracked armored vehicles like a tank. None of our vehicles or even our UAS, none of them are weaponized. We don't have any 50 caliber weapons. We don't have anything that launches an explosive projectile. And then we don't have anything in category 13, which is a variety of different military tools that deal with crowds. This slide shows what we do have. So robots, armored personnel carrier, command and control vehicle, specialized firearms and ammunition, etc. And we'll go through each one of these individually here throughout the PowerPoint, starting with category number 1. These are just some photographs. On the left-hand side of your screen is a tactical robot. And on the right-hand side are some of the UAS. There are actually 2 different models that we possess as part of that program. So one of the questions is raised is what are these tools used for? For the tactical robot, it's used during high-risk incidents, specifically designed to provide video and audio information and allows for us to communicate with folks, and also as a de-escalation tool as we can talk back and forth with an individual inside of a building. This is typically used for situations in which an offender barricades him or herself in a structure. UAS, our drone program, we have a standalone policy that covers that program. It's policy 611, which is available on our website for public consumption, and pretty much used for the same set of circumstances as our tactical robot. The only difference being that the UAS is also used for some of the in-progress unfolding critical incidents that happen in the city. Category 2 covers armored personnel carriers. We do have one. We have had one for years. This is a picture of it. I apologize. We cut the front end of it off. One of the questions was raised was, does it have breaching equipment? The answer is no. It has a front grille similar to a regular police car, with the exception of the size. It's a little bit bigger. This is a Ford F-550 pickup truck with armor plating is the simplest way to describe this vehicle. This is what we use it for. We deploy it during training exercises and high-risk incidents because it provides ballistic protection for us and even more importantly for community members. So if there's a danger area, we need to get somebody evacuated or out of it safely. This is a way that we can do that using this vehicle. It can also transport personnel and equipment to and from these scenes. Category number 5 covers command and control vehicles. We have one of those as well. This is a Freightliner that we purchased in part with city funds, but a huge portion of this was paid for through grant funding. And this is what we use that for. So we take it out to all of our special response unit activations. We use it during high-risk incidents, and it serves as an incident command center. So this is where, special response unit leadership, members of the fire department, folks from emergency medical services, all the decision makers are at during a critical incident. And it also serves as a backup communication center. So if we have a problem here in our headquarters building and the comm center goes down, this is a way that we can continue to communicate with both the police and fire department and respond to calls for service in the field. This vehicle also serves as a workspace for our crisis negotiations team. So these folks are specifically trained in de-escalation and negotiation techniques. And they have a specific workspace in there to be able to talk to folks. We use them quite extensively when we deal with folks who are barricaded. And this can also transport personnel and equipment. Category number 7 has to do with breaching apparatuses. This is the only one that's responsive to the bill. And it is the breaching shotgun that we have. And the breaching shotgun rounds, which are, they're not a bullet like a normal shotgun would fire. It's actually compressed powder that's designed to defeat locking mechanisms. And we use this quite simply to gain entry into a structure during a high-risk incident or an emergency. So if we have to make a fast entry into a structure, this is one of the tools that we use. Category 10 deals with specialized firearms and ammunition. So in this photograph here on the left-hand side is your basic AR-15 platform carbine rifle. And on the right-hand side is a bolt-action rifle that's commonly carried by our members of our special response unit who specialize in precision shooting. These specific weapons are only carried, well, I take that back. The carbine, as a standard across California and the United States, is pretty much a standardized rifle that is deployed in patrol cars. And that became fact after the large bank shootout that happened in Los Angeles that folks might remember from the 90s, where the individuals involved in that were wearing body armor. And then they're also carried by members of our special response unit as they respond to high-risk incidents. They're used during incidents where distance is a factor. There are distance limitations with a pistol that are not the case with the carbine rifle. They're used in incidents where offenders are wearing body armor. And I know that was a factor in the incident that we just witnessed in Buffalo, New York, where the offender was wearing body armor. And they are used during hostage rescue or incidents where precision is a factor because the carbine rifle and the rifle that our snipers carry are accurate, very accurate, more so than a pistol. Category number 12 has to do with noise flash diversionary devices and also chemical agents. So on the right-hand side of the slide is a noise flash diversionary device, often called an NFDD or referred to as a flashbang. And then the device on the left is a CS gas canister. So for the noise flash diversionary device or flashbang, these are also used during high-risk incidents. They're used to distract and disorient dangerous subjects and used for the purpose of obtaining a tactical advantage by creating a diversion. And for the chemical agents, or what's commonly referred to as tear gas, they're also used during high-risk incidents. They can help us obtain a tactical advantage by creating a diversion. They're used for area denial or dispersal, and they can be used in both a barricade setting, or during a riot, and we can get into questions about that. And we only use them within the provisions of our policy and within the provisions of AB 48, which is a law that was signed in September of 2021 and went into effect January 1, 2022 also. And that governs for the entire state the restricted use of CS gas as it relates to crowd management. Category 14 covers some of the specialty impact munition and delivery systems that we have in our inventory. So on the right-hand side of the slide is a 40 millimeter launcher, and on the left-hand side is what's referred to as a sponge round You'll see the blue tip of that round. That's the actual munition itself, and it's kind of the size and consistency of a racquetball. We also have, which is not pictured, an FN 303 less lethal launcher. This is a device that shoots a frangible plastic round that contains a little bit of liquid OC and can be used on dangerous subjects or for area denial. And the key to this is that it allows us to utilize these tools from a distance. Officers don't have to get close to a dangerous subject to use this. And again, these must be used within the provisions of AB 48. For the 40 millimeter less lethal launcher used during high-risk incidents, also an option for dangerous subjects from a distance, also used for area denial or dispersal, and within the provisions of AB 48. One of the questions that we've been asked, and probably will continue to be asked, is why we need these things. I just added a slide to share some stats with you. These are very fresh. The FBI just published a report within the last few days on active shooter incidents in the nation. Last year in 2021, there were 61 active shooter incidents in the United States, which is a 52.5% increase from 2020 and a 96.8% increase from 2017. So significant increase there. For us here in Hayward, on average, we had one person shot in this community a week in 2021, and we are on the same pace here in 2022. Additionally, our field personnel averaged at least one firearm seizure every other day in 2021 for a total of 209 firearms seized last year. And we are again on a similar pace in 2022. And then I think this has been a very, very difficult week, I know, for me and all of us here on this call and all of us here in this country, quite frankly, with the incidents that have happened in Laguna Woods, Buffalo, and Uvalde, Texas. Those are very, very fresh in all of our minds. Additionally, there's a proliferation of sophisticated weaponry available to offenders. Just a quick story. This is within the last 6 months. We had an incident that happened over at Southland Mall involving a couple of unarmed security guards who approached a white van that was illegally parked. They knocked on the van, no answer. They placed a sticker on there indicating the car was illegally parked. And once they got back in their vehicles, a subject got out of the van with an AR style rifle and ended up shooting both of these security guards. Fortunately, they survived. But one of the questions that we got during the work session was, do we have any real local, recent events to speak about? And this is certainly one of them. We do take into account historical events. I mentioned the bank robbery down in Los Angeles that I think everybody has seen videos of. Each piece of the equipment listed in the legislation is pretty much standard in law enforcement agencies, not only in California, but across the nation. And they are truly in our possession for officer and community safety. I think that we would all agree the community has the expectation that we're prepared to respond, quite frankly, for this community's worst day. People are going to have that expectation that we are able to respond to anything that happens here. And so to that end, we have to plan for the potential, not the probability. That's one of the golden rules that we use here. In terms of HPD training and use, so we do provide training on each piece of equipment that we have in our inventory. There's both initial and annual training that's provided. So our staff must show proficiency and compliance with established post and department standards. Not everything on the equipment list is, there's not a post course for everything listed on the equipment list, although a lot of it is. And most of the equipment that's listed is limited to the members of our special response unit. These are not things that are routinely taken out into the field. They are only deployed during incident specific responses. And so it's not a matter of routine to have, for example, chemical agents and CS gas out in the field. That is a very, very incident specific tool. And we do have separate policies governing usage for each of these tools, and all of those are available on our website. One of the questions that was raised is, regarding the authorization to use some of this equipment. So when we respond to high-risk incidents or critical events in the field, we operate just like the fire department does under the incident command system. So it's an organized hierarchical structure where somebody is designated as the incident commander. That's typically the lieutenant. And then there's also a tactical commander. That's either a lieutenant or sergeant who has tactical expertise. It's usually the SRU or SWAT commander. And those are the folks who are in charge of running these incidents and have the decision-making authority about which tools to use and when. And so it's not at the officer level to make that call. Sorry about my lights. It's not at the officer level to make that call in the field. People don't get to arbitrarily take out CS gas or any of these less lethal tools and use them. They have to be authorized by the incident commander, and then the tactical commander will authorize use within the boundaries of law and policy. And that's it on the equipment. What we want to do also is just make you all aware of some upcoming community meetings. So this is the first virtual meeting that we're doing tonight. We appreciate you all being our guinea pigs. We are doing another one on Monday, June 6th from 5:30 to 7:30. That's again going to be virtual, and people will be able to access it just like you all did tonight. And then we're hosting kind of an open house in-person event at our North Resource Center at 22701 Main Street on Saturday, June 11th. And that's from 9 a.m. To noon. And we'll be there on site with staff so that people can take a look at some of the equipment that's responsive to the bill and ask questions and engage with our staff in dialogue on some of these things. This is a link to the website. So if you go to the Hayward Police Department's main page, down on the right-hand side, you'll see a link to military equipment. That's everything that has to do with AB 41, including our inventory and the military equipment use policy that we're in the process of building. That's one of the outcomes of these processes. And then if you have any other questions, Officer Cassandra Favell, who's on the call tonight, her contact information is listed there. So please feel free. In fact, we can probably drop that after I get off the slide. We probably drop that in the chat, and that way folks can have it. So Cass, if you want to do that, and that way, if you have questions that you don't think of now, or you want to follow up with us in some manner, you can certainly do that. We're happy to chat with anyone. And that is the extent of the presentation. And so I'll turn it back over to City Manager McAdoo.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Matthews. And there's a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A. Maybe you could just talk to these a little bit before we go to the public comment and hands that are raised. So the first is, when do you use Category 10 equipment, and how and when are young kids able to carry these types? And I think that's probably a reference to some of the incidents we've seen in the last couple of weeks. I think Category 10 is the AR type rifles.
That's a great question. I think I have, is Category 10. Oh yeah, okay. I'm looking at sorry, my list here. I've got the numbers off a little bit. We're talking about, okay, specialized firearms and ammunition. So the Category 10, so for the carbine rifles, the way that we deploy these is that there's one assigned to each of our patrol vehicles. One of the things that we do when we talk about, we have to plan for the potential and not the probability. We have to be prepared for bad things to happen here in this community. The problem is that you can't know when or where those things are going to happen. You can't know when or where our vehicles are going to be in the field, or which vehicles are going to be in the field. And so kind of the deployment model is that we have these available for our officers in each of the patrol vehicles. The decision to take those out is based on the nature of the call for service and the information coming in. These are not pulled out as a matter of routine, but they are pulled out when officers are responding to, for example, reports of individuals with firearms, reports of individuals engaging in significant violent crime, et cetera. So they're not walking around with these things as a matter of routine. They're incident-specific tools that are pulled out in the grand scheme of things fairly rarely. As far as young kids, I know that a lot of the conversations that are going on right now are centering around access to guns, access to guns by kids. Every state has a different set of laws. I think that nobody in the state of California under the age of 21 is allowed to own or possess a firearm. So kids shouldn't be carrying these. If they are, it's illegal. So yeah, I hope that answers that particular question.
And then I just want, maybe if the chief, I know maybe the chief can speak to this. I know you guys are bringing forward a proposal for dash cameras in the police vehicles. And Chief, do you want to talk about the automatic activation feature with those?
Yes, as far as the dash cameras go, as soon as we activate our lights to pull someone over, or we activate our body cameras, it will simultaneously activate the dash cameras in the patrol vehicles. So we get a different view. As everyone is painfully aware, we had a sergeant that was murdered in Hayward on a traffic stop, and that was prior to us having the body cameras. And so oftentimes when we do these stops, last year was a terrible year for us. We had one of the highest number of law enforcement officers killed in ambush attacks, and a lot of them had happened as they were either exiting their vehicle or pulling up the scenes. So this will just give us a bird's eye view, and it's also an accountability measure to give us another view of an incident, to see if we did something wrong or to prove we did something right. So I think the dash cams will be a huge addition to our arsenal of things in our transparency quest.
And then if I'm remembering correctly, when the rifles are removed from the vehicle, are the dash cams automatically activated at that point as well? Was that, am I recalling that correctly? Or is that a different, am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, that's something else, but it's a feature we definitely could look to explore if it's available. Again, anything we can utilize to allow us to have another view of our actions, to make sure, whenever we take these weapons out and have to utilize anything, we reverse engineer these incidents to find out lessons learned and to get better. As you've seen with a lot of the mass shootings, there's a huge study done by the FBI, and it's for the same purposes, to analyze and find out if we find ourselves in this position again, what we can do better. And that's what these dash cameras will help us do.
Thanks. Okay, the next question, probably back to Deputy Chief. This is probably complicated, and maybe we can provide some more information as in follow-up, which is how long are the trainings for these weapons? And I think that probably varies depending on the weapon, but you can.
Yeah, it does. It depends on the weapon, that we're talking about. I think if we're talking about carbine rifles, just to use that as an example, since that's where kind of the conversation is going, there's a bunch of training that each officer has to go through in the basic police academy. Once they onboard here at the police department, whether or not they are a lateral candidate coming from another agency or a new employee from the academy, they have to go through a 2-day post-certified basic rifle course that's facilitated here at the department. And then there's annual training requirements for each officer in the city, and that varies by assignment. So if, for example, if you're assigned to patrol, you've got to qualify with the rifle annually. You go through training on the rifle annually. And then if you're, like, for example, if you're assigned to the SWAT team, they train on top of normal officer training. They train an additional 20 to 24 hours a month. So they'll get significantly more training with some of these tools. But that's just kind of an example. Like now, if we're talking about vehicles, we're talking about the armored personnel carrier, there is no necessarily training requirement. However, we do a familiarization for everybody in the department, and then the SWAT team usually takes that out with them when they respond to critical incidents. So.
Just because we're on the topic of carbine rifles, there's a couple other comments. And why was it not made clear in the initial document that carbine rifles are carried by all patrol officers? I feel this would have been important information for council. And then also, our carbine rifles usually carried on patrol motorcycles.
So apologies if that was not made clear. And we have a couple of other conversations scheduled with the council, so we'll make sure to include that so that they're aware. I do know that one of the questions that was raised when the initial list was put up on the website was, why do you have so many? And I think that can kind of speak to that. So we'll make sure that we include that in future communications. As far as the motorcycle question, yes, they are carried on the back of the motorcycles.
And if I might add, our mayor, our council members, they've done ride-alongs with our patrol officers, so they've physically seen these weapons in our vehicles. And just for context about why we have them, our special duty unit just a little bit ago worked on a search warrant and seized an Uzi-style pistol, a carbine, much like the ones demonstrated in our presentation, and a Glock-style handgun, and a 100-round drum that attaches to the rifle. In other words, it kind of shows the proliferation of these weapons on the streets. And even with the equipment we currently have, I think to a certain degree, we're still outgunned with regards to some of the things we're seizing in Hayward.
Okay. I'm going to go to maybe, so one question is, how has the current policy draft differed from than the first draft that was publicly released? And I think we're also going to provide probably a red line version as we go through the various community meetings, but maybe if you can speak to some of the key changes that have been made and that will continue to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been looking at what other agencies are doing and soliciting feedback from the community. That's another function of this meeting here, and some of the conversations that we've had with council. And I will say that it is in its current state, which is still being worked on, it is far more robust and detailed than the last. Specifically maps out what the Hayward Police Department has to do, not only to continue using the equipment that we have in our inventory, but if the department ever gets to a place where we need to get more of the same or new equipment, we have to go through our governing body, which is our city council. So it maps all of that stuff out, and that's something that we'll share publicly on the website before we go back to council.
And then there's a question of whether this requires a change to the PD use of force policies.
AB 41 itself does not have anything to do with use of force policy. So it's basically a transparency and community engagement and approval process for obtaining specific equipment. That's the intent behind the bill. The HPD's use of force policy is also up on the website for folks that want to take a look at that, but that's a separate policy from this conversation.
And then what are the trainings look like for the chemical weapons?
So there's initial training that happens for every officer in the basic police academy. And that covers everything from authorized uses. Again, now with AB 48, that's very, very specific. And then it also includes a portion where every officer that goes to the police academy is exposed to it, much like the members of the military in basic training. The thought process behind that is number one, if you're going to be using this in some capacity at some point potentially, you should know what it feels like. And then it also provides an opportunity to test equipment. We do have gas masks and things like that need to be tested. For us here, the only people who are authorized to use chemical agents are members of the SWAT team. So there's 25 people that are on that team. They've been through post-certified training on these topics, and several of them have been through post-instructor training on these topics. And they train for, I think it's a 10-hour training day annually on chemical agents. And again, we expose them to it on an annual basis as well. And not like it would be in a crowd management setting where it's outside and there's air, but it's inside of a room And we want to make sure that, number one, they know how to function, they know what it feels like, and that their equipment works. So they do that on an annual basis.
I don't know if we know the answer to this question, but I'm just going to share it because it did get shared with us in the chat. How did the second grader in Sacramento gain possession of a firearm? Do we have any clue how that happened?
I do not. I don't know, Chief. I can tell you that I was as shocked as probably everybody on this call to learn that, but I'm not sure how that happened.
Yeah, and I don't know either. But I know there's a similar incident where a child had a gun in the backpack and set it down and the gun went off. And a child, I don't know if it was the child, but a child was struck and grazed by a bullet. And the parent in that case was charged for not having the firearm secured properly. I do not know if that's this case. I know that the child had it in a desk with a magazine that I believe was detached. And other students did exactly what we ask of everyone to do. They notified the teaching staff immediately and they seized the weapon.
Since we're on the topic of schools, and there's a question I'm going to jump down to, in terms of training and protection of citizens, especially in school shootings, do you engage right away or stand around for 90 minutes like the police officers at Uvalde?
From the lessons learned in Columbine, we practice and preach going immediately. We know in a high 90 percentile, when we engage these gunmen, they either commit suicide or we neutralize them in the high 90 percentile range. So we teach to go in immediately. We don't wait for specialized units to respond. When we have the active shooter, we tell our folks to go in immediately. And again, that goes back to having the patrol rifles in an active shooter situation where you don't necessarily have to close the distance to engage that subject. If they have a long rifle and we have a long rifle, we stand a better shot, pardon the pun, of neutralizing the subject.
Great, thanks. Okay, we're gonna go back up to other question, and I'm trying to answer some typing answers that I can answer, which are more logistical questions, and then some of the ones where I think more people will be interested in hearing them, we'll answer live. The pepper launcher, was that on the original document and presentation to council a few weeks ago?
I'd have to look at the staff report to see if it was in the staff report, but it's been included on the so the equipment list that was provided to council had it on there, and it's been on that list since we put it up on our website at the beginning of April. So that piece of equipment has been available for council since we put it on the website.
Great, thanks. What is the policy for when Category 14 noise flash equipment may be used to disperse crowds?
So it's a little bit of a complicated question. I think it's important to make the distinction between, what a lawful and unlawful gathering is, right? I think we would all agree that under the First Amendment, everybody has a right to protest, demonstrate, and march, and we will certainly facilitate that. And again, that's stuff that we encourage. What we're talking about with some of these tools is when a lawful gathering morphs into an unlawful gathering, and now we have rioting, which is folks engaging in acts of violence, significant property damage, looting, etc. Typically, as a matter of routine, Category 14, which I think encompasses the noise flash distraction devices, is that what we're talking about? Or no, we're talking about the specialty impact munition system.
I think the noise flash devices was the question.
So those aren't typically used to disperse crowds. There's another device that's similar called a handball, which we have in our inventory, which is basically kind of like this little rubber housing that has flash powder in it. It basically makes a bright light and a loud sound, and oftentimes that will get people to leave the area. But we don't typically use a flashbang device in crowd control or riot situations.
Thank you. And I'll maybe just take the next question is, when is HPD planning to present the updated policy to council? We're currently working on the schedule. Before it comes back to the full council, it will go to the Council Infrastructure Committee. And that should be probably in, I think, early June, so sometime, and then hopefully in mid to late June, bringing it back to council for further discussion. Okay. What is the policy on use of these military pieces of equipment when HPD is participating in a joint state or federal action?
That's a great question. So whether we're in our jurisdiction or outside of our jurisdiction, whether we're participating in a joint task force or federal operation, we are required to abide by our policies at all times. So if somebody else's policy is different and there's a mutual aid request or request for assistance from a federal agency like the FBI, we don't adopt their policies. We continue to operate under our own policies. So all the rules of engagement will remain the same regardless of whether or not we're in town, out of town. Sorry about my light. In town, out of town, or assigned to another detail with other agencies.
Next comment or question. During the protests over the death of George Floyd, we saw many incidents where police fired 40mm less lethal rounds directly into crowds of people. Is this type of use permitted under HPD policy? And if not, can you describe how these 40mm rounds would be used?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question as well. We do not fire any munitions indiscriminately into crowds. I think that we would all agree that that's an inappropriate use of these tools. The 40mm and the FN 303 less lethal launcher are both, they're single fire, person specific tools. And when we're talking about dangerous individuals in a riot setting, these are the individuals that are throwing bricks. I think there was one point when we went to a mutual aid call where people were throwing D-cell batteries at us, that type of thing. So these are tools that would be used to hopefully prevent those folks from being able to get close enough so that they could hurt officers on the skirmish line. But we do not fire any of that stuff indiscriminately into a crowd. That's not an appropriate use.
As the chief and deputy chief have said many times, there are many categories which we do not have and will not seek to acquire. Would it be possible to specifically include an exclusion of these types of items in the policy?
I would say so. I mean, we're never going to ask for a tank. Yeah, I think there's some equipment that we would all agree that we could exclude right off the top. Chief, I'll defer to you for the final on that, but
it's just like the drone policy where we said we won't weaponize or add facial rec technology. We can have language in the policy that speaks to that.
Great. Okay, and then another comment. AB 481 says the policy requires mechanisms to ensure compliance with the military equipment use policy, including which independent persons or entities have oversight authority, and if applicable, would legally enforceable sanctions are put in place for violations of the policy. Can you talk specifically about the independent persons or entities with oversight authority?
So the oversight authority falls to the governing body under AB 481, which in our case is the city council. So the city council is a governing body. They're the ones that ultimately have to approve the policy, the ordinance, and then the bill requires them to review and approve it annually thereafter. So
and I think I'll just maybe add a comment. One of the I think things we're talking about in the policy is reporting annually on how many times these different weapons were utilized during the year, so that the council can have visibility to that. And especially if there was, there's obviously training use because these are used during training scenarios, but if they're actually used in a critical incident, providing those details to the city council annually as they review this policy. Okay. It was mentioned before, there are certain military grade weapons that you all don't have and don't plan on requesting. Would you also support the council banning these weapons to ensure they are never used or requested in our city?
Yeah, absolutely.
No problem with that at all.
Okay. Is the drone or UAV marked that we have is it marked and identifiable as belonging to the Hayward Police Department so that we can distinguish it between it and a civilian drone that may be used illegally or which HPD may be violating its policy and use?
They are marked. I'd have to go look at them to see, I mean, obviously the higher it is, the harder it is to distinguish, but they are marked. And I will add, since we're on the UAS program, our website is live. We're updating the website with flight data, so folks can go on there and take a look at the flight log so they can see when and where and why those are being used. So that's up and running now.
And then
as far as distinguishing the drones when they're in the air, it's difficult for even trained eyes to identify which drones are which, because most of them are the same color. And so it is definitely difficult to discern which is which.
Probably especially in when it's dark out as well. I think you guys will have the drone at the community open house. So if folks want to come look at it specifically, that would be an opportunity to do that. There's someone saying that there's a hard time reading all the questions. If you go down, I think in the bottom toolbar of your Zoom app, there should be Q&A. And if you pull that box up, there should be open and then answered. And then if you go to answered, it should have the list of all of the questions that have been asked so far. And then we'll also, we'll get a transcript of all of the questions that were asked, and that'll be included on the website with the recording from this evening's meeting. So just wanted to make sure that people knew that as well. So you'll be able to see the questions from this discussion posted afterwards. And then I'll try to answer this next question, and you guys can correct me if I'm incorrect in saying this. Once the policy is adopted, can the safety equipment that has been approved be grandfathered in so we don't have to review these every year, just any new equipment that may need to be acquired? So under AB 481, my understanding is we have to bring an annual report to the council and reaffirm it every year. So it wouldn't, even if we're not asking for new equipment, we still have to come back and report on this annually to the council. And I think that's one of the things we're going to include in our policy that is probably additive than more than other agencies, which is the use cases, how many times we've utilized the equipment. That is not required in AB 41. And so that's something that we're doing to add transparency to our process.
Can I just add one thing to that, City Manager McAdoo? So in addition to the annual reporting within 30 days of the publication of that report, the bill requires that we do another community engagement event. So these are things that we'll continue to do on an annual basis once that report has been published, and allow folks to ask questions about it.
And again, when you report annually to council, will that also be open to public comment? Yes, because it'll probably come back as an action item to accept the annual report. So that'll be available for public comment as well. Great. Well, I'm glad people are using the Q&A. That seems to have been really helpful to allow people to ask their questions. We do have one person with their hand raised. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jesse Gunn, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk if you want to go ahead and try and unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I appreciate you coming here and kind of answering our questions. A lot of times, as community members, we kind of feel like we're left to fend for ourselves and try to figure things out. So this is helpful. So I live here in Hayward. I'm a teacher. And so with recent events, it is very difficult to hear what's been going on in the world. I do want to say that it feels like our police has never been more prepared to handle an active shooter situation than they currently are, as far as in their ability to respond, and yet we're still having them. To me, it feels just from my point of view that if we wanted to get rid of active shooter situations by militarizing our police, it doesn't seem to be working. What I do feel like, and we probably agree with this, is that we have a serious gun violence epidemic. I would want I would ask, I'm not sure if HPD is permitted to do this, to contact as an entity, to contact our legislatures and ask for help addressing things with gun violence, as far as like just kind of curing the whole situation altogether, by having some better laws, getting some guns off the streets, and if maybe in an act of good faith, taking a good look at what weapons they have and saying, you know what, we want to remove all weapons from our streets, not just the ones from law-abiding citizens and anybody else who owns these, that we want to kind of make a statement here. I'm just curious if that is something that HPD is interested in.
I just want to pipe it before that. I'll let the chief talk too, but absolutely. I know our chief has been actively in communication with our state lobbyists, our state legislators about different pieces of legislation, different issues that come up regarding policing. Some of our council members will bring those to our attention. We've held joint meetings and joint conversations between council members and police staff and the legislators. And then one project that I'd love the chief to talk specifically about, which I think is really unique, and we're very fortunate to have Cal State East Bay here in our community. The chief launched an initiative to do a research project around ghost guns and working in partnership with Cal State East Bay. So maybe he can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, just real fast. Our ghost gun seizures, we did a look at a five-year trajectory from 5 years ago to 2022, and we're up 1,850% in our ghost gun seizures during that period. So we are working with two professors from Cal State East Bay to look at all of our gun seizures, but with a specific emphasis and focus on our ghost gun seizures, and to try to determine, where the weapons came from and how they ended up in our city, quite frankly, because the mayor and I sat on the conference call with a young lady, to your point, Jesse, who was interested in lobbying for tougher gun laws and the eradication of sales in the state of California. And specifically, she's going region by region, and I wanted to know specifically what we were doing. Well, that spurred interest in this project, and we did it before ghost guns were really high on the radar for a lot of folks. After we started this process, we heard the president come out and speak about it. We heard the governor come out several times and speak about it. And I don't know if the 3 weapons seized tonight are ghost guns or not, but those are 3 weapons off the street. And Jesse, to your point, I watched an interview today regarding all the shootings in the United States, and they interviewed an individual from the UK, and they talked about the strengthening of their gun laws after they had a similar shooting to the one we just had in Texas. And they do not have close to a quarter of the shootings we have. They've pushed the gun use in their country down so low. As you well know, a lot of their officers they don't carry firearms. And to your point, I dream of that day when we get to a point where we don't need to, some of our officers don't need to carry firearms, or potentially all of them. But unfortunately, this country has a love affair with firearms, with guns. And until we strengthen these laws, and my command staff and I had a roundtable discussion about it today, but until these laws are tougher, we're going to keep finding ourselves in the same place. And the city manager is absolutely right. I spoke to Mr. Swalwell about this. We've talked to our current Attorney General Bonta. He came and spoke to the sheriffs in Northern California and the police chiefs, and had a very constructive dialogue about some of the things that we're seeing and experiencing, and ghost guns and guns in general were high on the list. And obviously, we had one of the highest numbers last year of law enforcement officers killed, and the weapon of choice was always a firearm. Majority firearm. And so, to your point, these things are killing our community members, are killing our police officers, they're killing our children. And so, any chance, any opportunity I get, I will definitely get out there in front of this thing and lobby for stricter gun laws.
I appreciate that. And I guess, so from the teaching perspective, when I think about, young people getting their hands on guns, obviously they're not going to a gun store to purchase them because it's illegal in California. You can't have a ghost gun shipped to you legally in California. So they're coming from somewhere else. Yeah. I guess what my question is that if if we're in the current situation where the police are getting better and better equipment, more powerful equipment, more military tools year by year. We didn't have UAVs, for example, last year. And obviously they're not weaponized, but you kind of get what I'm saying, that we're getting our police department is getting more advanced as far as their ability to combat crises.
Can I correct you on that? Most of the stuff we've had, to Deputy Chief Matthews' point, it's old. That old Ford F-550 truck, a lot of stuff we've had for a long time. And to put it in,
you should see the inside of it. It's
and Jesse, to put it in context, when I came to the police department, I was issued a 6-shooter, a 357 highway patrolman special. And the only time when we changed in my old agency was because an officer was reloading that 6-shooter, and the subject he was engaged in a gun battle with had a semi-automatic and walked over and executed him. And so we then moved into a different arena. We've been playing catch up ever since, and it's not an arms race for us or anything like that. I'm saying that it's not a matter of every year we want to get something better and better. I agree with you 100%, but 20, 30 years ago, nobody was wearing body armor. Now, a lot of folks are wearing body armor that are encountered by law enforcement. And as Deputy Chief Matthews talked about the big bank heist in LA, it really illustrated the point of why we have to have these weapons, which is when we started to see them distributed nationwide, is because folks were coming up with the idea, hey, if that's all the police has, we're gonna trump them, and we're just gonna show up with superior firepower and kill them and leave. So after the bank robbery, and that was the theory behind that particular shootout. And for lack of better words, it worked for a while, until the police officers had to break into a gun store and secure weapons to fight back. And I don't think anybody in the public wants us to get to a point where we see all that death and destruction and have to secure weapons from some gun store. And fortunately in Hayward, we don't have a whole lot of that. And so we wouldn't even have a place to break into. So it's why we made sure our patrol officers are armed and equipped to deal with these threats, these emerging threats. And quite frankly, the weapons we seized tonight, I wish I could put a picture up. There's a 100-round drum. I believe it's a 100-round drum. They also have 50, it could be that. But you're talking about weapons that if you took 2 police officers and the complement of every bullet that they carry on their person, they would not, this guy could keep firing while they were reloading and emptying their entire armament on their person. And he would still be firing, he or she would still be firing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anybody wants a scenario where the protector of the people is taken out and that person has full access to the people after that. So, I mean, it's not that we're trying to acquire new weapons, and it's not that we have these weapons and these things are still happening. When you look at the places where they're happening, a lot of it involves the tactics that you're hearing coming out of Texas. And I'm not going to second guess anybody else, but I can tell you here, our officers are taught, if you go to one of these situations, you are to engage immediately. You're not to wait for anybody else. You are to engage immediately.
Yeah, I appreciate these comments, because there's a lot of things going on social media right now, and it's frustrating for me as somebody who is trying to get guns off the streets, but not just with everybody. I don't want anybody to be having guns on the streets, including our officers, to be honest. And so I've been hearing things like arming teachers, putting police in schools, this things that is not us. I don't want a gun at school. I'm a teacher and I don't want to carry. So I just feel like more than, as you mentioned, the arms race, it does feel like an arms race, and it doesn't feel like we're winning this fight in this point. So I feel like we need to do something different as far as reaching students and kids that are getting a hold of guns. They're getting them from somewhere, and it's not the gun store. We did have here in Hayward a gun store that was burglarized a couple years ago, and guns were stolen. I kind of wonder if we got those back, if they found those, and if they found the people that did it. But yeah, I guess that you kind of capitalized my main concern and my questions was, if the arms race is if you say it's not an arms race, it feels like one. But if it's not working, maybe we got to do something else. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I want to make sure we have some other hands raised now, so I want to make sure we get to other people's comments. So John Lindsay Poland. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk, and you can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Good evening. I work for the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker organization, and we have been studying equipment acquired by law enforcement agencies in California for the last several years. And we have also studied dozens and dozens of policies submitted by law enforcement agencies under AB 481 this year. I also do work in the gun violence prevention space. I think one of the efforts that involves law enforcement is the red flag laws, which in California, there's a fairly good one. I would be interested at some point if the chief might talk about how many instances of use of removal of firearms from persons who have shown a high risk of harming themselves or others have been carried out in Hayward. But I wanted to speak mostly in relation to the proposed Hayward PD policy for AB 481. You know, everyone understands in an active shooter situation or in the West Hollywood bank robbery situation, which is I've heard many law enforcement agencies cite over and over again, that those worst case scenarios are ones where you are most likely to find community support for the possession of this equipment. But we also know that this equipment is typically deployed by tactical teams, by SWAT teams that are most often deployed in other types of situations, in search warrants, serving warrants of different kinds, in various situations. And I think what we're interested in is not just the worst case scenario, because what's at stake here is not just whether you have this equipment, but what are the rules that will govern your deployment of it. And I don't mean the firing of it, I mean the deployment of it. For any given situation. So it was disappointing in the proposed policy for all of these different types of equipment. There's a required piece of the use policy, which is authorized use. In other words, when is it okay to use this stuff and when is it not? And particularly, what is the lower threshold of authorized use? Is it okay to use it when in the middle of the night when there are kids present? Is it okay to use it at a protest? To deploy, I'm talking about, to show, to exhibit to the community very militarized equipment. But this proposed policy for different types of equipment over and over does not identify authorized uses, not to mention far from prohibited uses. It identifies authorized users, right? Who in the department is authorized to use it, but not authorized uses, which is really, I think, what a lot of community members are interested in. Are you going to say, and when is the city council going to say it's okay to deploy this stuff, and when is it not okay? Another piece of this, which is kind of disappointing, is the sections on chemical agents and on the launcher projectiles, because there is another new state law, AB 48, that significantly limits the deployment of chemical agents and launchers, the less lethal launchers, particularly in crowd control, only when there's a threat to serious bodily injury or death or life, and only after a number of other things have been carried out. Including attempts to de-escalate, including warnings that it's going to be used that are audible and multiple times, and an opportunity for people to leave. None of that is here, none of it. And so even if you're incorporating it into other underlying policy, it's not here. It's not in the thing that the community is and the elected officials are deliberating on. So I think it can be improved. You've got time to improve it. You can come back, you can do a rewrite. There's time, there's opportunity, and if there's will, I hope you will. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And I think you I don't think I saw your name earlier on when we were doing the presentation, but that is one of the changes that we've made since that first draft that was presented and has been on the website. In the presentation tonight, we did talk about authorized uses for the different types of equipment, and that will be part of the final policy. So I think we are working to make some of those changes. So appreciate that feedback.
And Deputy Chief Matthews also covered AB 48. I don't know if the caller was there when he did, but he mentioned it a few times.
That'll also be
well aware of it.
Yeah, great. Okay, next speaker is Suzanne. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to unmute. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hi, John Lindsay Poland, who's not from Hayward. Is it okay to use it after 19 children are dead? Is that okay to use it then? I mean, dear Lord, these officers are not using these guns and equipment just randomly out there in the public. Remember this equipment is 20 years old. I will be the first person to vote to get new equipment for my HPD. The people out there, the offenders out there have big guns and body armor. I do not want my local police department, Hayward PD, to be outgunned. So you guys need to figure something else out. You can't unarm our police officers. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Kelly,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Councilmember McAdoo, can I offer just some commentary?
City Manager McAdoo, not council member.
I almost called you by your first name. I want to be
You
professional.
can call me Kelly. That's fine.
Okay.
I won't take offense.
So one of the things that we have internally is what we call a risk assessment analysis. I know a lot of this equipment that we've talked about is assigned specifically to our special response unit and our SWAT team. But there's a process for evaluating an incident, and we do this in a case-by-case basis to make a determination about whether or not even using the SWAT team or the special response unit is proportional to what we're dealing with. So, and much like, somebody that works in a trade, electrician or a carpenter or something like that, when you go to a job site, you bring your tools with you. And then based on, the requirements of the job, you select you select what's appropriate based on the circumstances there. And that's kind of the we don't want to be in a position where we get out there in the field and need a piece of equipment, and now we have to run back to the station or go to some other place to get it. That creates time, and we may not have the luxury of that. And so just to give you some perspective on how this stuff works for us internally. Thank you.
And I'll add to that and simply say this. I've been shocked being here for 3 years in Hayward, coming from San Francisco with the population density and the crime issue there. I was shocked at how many times outside agencies have tracked folks wanted for murder and attempted murder to the Hayward city limits. And we've assisted them in taking these folks into custody. And sometimes the tools that we have and utilize, they're a deterrent from folks shooting it out with us. And I can't think of anybody recently, and I'm not going to wood, not trying to jinx us, who has not looked out of one of those hotel windows and saw us out there with this equipment and has not decided it's better to surrender and deal with the court system than it is to deal with us. And that's a big plus, because we want all these things to end peacefully and that person have their day in court. We don't, to Deputy Chief Matthews' point, we don't just willy-nilly put this stuff out in the field. We take a look at and analyze it. And folks ask us all the time about de-escalation. Today, there was a subject that was believed to be on the roof of one of our local hotels with a gun. And the planning that goes into our patrol officers responding to these calls, we've gotten smarter and better with lessons learned throughout the years about how we approach and how we deal with these things. So oftentimes these weapons, they come out and they're more for show than anything else, because once the offender sees them, they surrender. So, it's not a worst case scenario always, but it's a scenario where when we're going after somebody wanted for a violent felony with a gun, we want to make sure we're prepared for every possible scenario. And tonight, for instance, with the seizure of those 3 weapons, the AR with the 100-round drum, if you showed up to that in a regular patrol car, one of our regular black and whites, you wouldn't stand a chance if that subject got to jump on you and engage you in that vehicle. That officer would not stand a chance. But some of the armored vehicles we have specifically for these, that's why we roll them. In case the individual we're trying to persuade to peacefully surrender does not. So, it's not worst case scenario. Everything's not a Hollywood shooting, but I don't want to take any losses of anybody's life to decide, okay, now we deploy this now that we've lost somebody. This is all preventative. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to utilize that equipment. But fortunately for us, we have not had to do that in a long time.
Okay, we've got a number of other hands up, so I want to make sure we get to folks. Next up is Susan Gelke. Go ahead, Susan, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I've been listening to some of the other comments that have been made, and my one comment is, we don't live in fantasy land. I think anybody who thinks that we can manage, without our police officers being armed, they're just not being realistic. I don't think that the people who are out there with their guns should have more rights to use heavy duty weapons than our police force. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't think anybody is really trying to get into a difficult military, situation. I just don't get that. I also, in the comment that Jesse made about being a teacher, I can't imagine how he would feel if he had an armed man or woman in his classroom shooting at his kids. I think he would have a different feeling about our police officers. And I just want to say, I think you officers are very professional and are doing a wonderful job considering the kind of stressful situations that you have to deal with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, next up, Cynthia Nunes. Okay, I think you should be able to unmute yourself, Cynthia.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everybody. I was calling in to raise some concerns around the policy itself that I really hope y'all take into consideration. But I also do want to point out a previous speaker, Suzanne, basically demonized John for not living in Hayward. I don't think you need to live in Hayward to care about what the police in Hayward is doing and what the community is. There are many people who don't live in Hayward, that work in Hayward, own businesses in Hayward, have family in Hayward, that the safety of the community impacts those folks as well. And that is actually including HPD officers who don't live in Hayward. So that feels really disrespectful, just throwing that out there. The other thing is, to say that the AR-15s aren't being used by HPD is literally, at this point, a blatant lie. When my cousin Augie was murdered by HPD in 2018, just days later, HPD was patrolling the same street that they murdered my cousin on with AR-15s in hand. That was just in 2018. So saying that they're not being used is lying to the community. And when I presented that to you, Chief, when my cousin was murdered, when you first came to be the chief of Hayward, you said that there was a man that y'all were looking for that was a Hispanic male in a red flannel that was a high alert because of the neighborhood that he was in, because it is a high crime neighborhood. And that itself is just, it's not fair to think that because the man is Latino in a bad neighborhood, and I quote, that means you need to be bringing out these AR-15s, especially when a man's life was taken just days before.
Cynthia, I never said that to you. I've never said that to you.
Okay, Chief, maybe we have different views of what happened in that meeting, but I know what happened in that meeting. Thank you. And I'm not done speaking. I would really appreciate me to have this moment. The other thing is the policy, as John highlighted, doesn't talk about the authorization deep enough. Y'all didn't do your due diligence here. Like, we need oversight that actually has teeth. Capis came to you and told you that they didn't feel comfortable with drones, and you still got drones. There are things that Capis said that didn't agree with you, and these things have still been done. The city of Hayward deserves an oversight that community actually deserves to give input to, and that's actually taken into consideration, because at the end of the day, you work for the community. Like all of you work for the community. Like remember that. That's what I don't get is y'all work for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I just I'm not sure if you were on earlier when we went through the presentation, but I don't believe that the department chief or deputy chief indicated the department does not use AR-15s. I think they were included in the presentation, and it was discussed that they are in every patrol car. So I just want to clarify that no one was trying to hide that fact, and we appreciate the feedback, and that's why we're here tonight, is to hear feedback on the policy so that we can make changes before it comes back to the council again. So I appreciate that. I'm just going to go to some of the Q&A first before we go back to live comments, just so we can make sure to get through some of them. This really isn't a question, but just a comment about fireworks can be stopped. And we do have a new fireworks ordinance in Hayward that we'll be testing out this summer. So that'll be interesting to see if that works. And then a question about where we can find more information on the projects between Cal State East Bay and HPD. And I think, Chief, we can work and try to figure out how to publicize that on the city's website in some respect. I think more of a comment. I imagine many citizens in Hayward would appreciate knowing the efforts of the city and HPD to influence our state legislators and how we can actively support these efforts. We're all feeling frustrated that we're not making progress on reasonable gun control, and we want to do more than vote to get significant change. We can think about ways that we could make our legislative actions more public around that. Okay, comment, I'm from Hayward and love and appreciate the work and research John has done. Also sounds like you didn't listen to what he said. So just comments. And then a comment back from John, right into the policy that the use is authorized for when there is an active shooter or body armor, which is good feedback. So I think we indicated that the authorized uses does need to be included in the policy. Okay, here's a question. For those 20-year-old weapons, how do you know that they still work?
We still test them routinely to make sure everything that we have works. And there are cycles for some of the actual weapons. There are replacement cycles where you're mandatorily required to replace them. And again, going back to that question about deploying them when there's body armor. When you look at the hate crime in Buffalo, New York, the retired police officer, there's no way to tell. The body armor now is so sleek and form-fitting that you just don't know who has it. The poor security guard who's the retired police officer, he did exactly what he was trained to do. This guy came in with an assault rifle. He fired at him, hit him in his vest, and was subsequently murdered by that individual after his shots failed to stop him because he was wearing body armor. It's not always like LA where they're heavily armored and they look like the big Stay Puft Marshmallow Man walking around covered from head to toe. Sometimes it's under clothing, under a trench coat, a sweat top or whatever, and you just don't know if they're wearing body armor or not. We do train our officers, and it's called a failure drill, for if you are engaging an individual with body armor, but you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes it's not visible and you don't know until everything's over and you check the individual and you find out that they were wearing body armor.
Great. There are a lot of comments in the Q&A box, and I think because I've enabled everyone to see all of them, I'm hoping that everyone can, if you cannot see all of the Q&A comments, I want to make sure we have enough time to answer the actual questions and to hear from public speakers. So I'm not going to go through, I did read some of the comments. I'm not going to go through and read all the rest of the comments, but anyone who is attending can read those, and I'll leave those up so folks can see those. But let me just get to some of the actual questions. Are there other less lethal options that can be added to your inventory available that may fall under the requirements? Water cannon, directed audio, etc. And do we have any plans to add any of the other less lethal options to the inventory?
No, a lot of those things we've taken a look. We absolutely do not want to acquire those things. Water cannon, and some of the stuff you look at and it just kind of makes you think back to the old civil rights movement. And those are not things that are appropriate for us to have in Hayward, nor will we seek to acquire them.
I'm going to go back to verbal comments, and we'll go ahead and TJ with Hayward Concerned Citizens. Go ahead, TJ, and unmute yourself.
Hi, I want to thank HPD. I appreciate the explanation of the different types of equipment. I appreciate their transparency as always. Knowing what I know doesn't change my mind that these things should be in their possession. Also, nothing being introduced is new. I trust that our police won't indiscriminately take these things and use them on the general public. There's enough checks and balances in place that I trust they'll be used in appropriate situations if ever needed. I've already seen on the city website, they do have, they're very transparent about the drone program. There are already logs and data open for public view. So again, I appreciate this. I will continue to support our police. And John Poland is not a resident. CAP does not decide. And Hayward is over 162,000 residents and is not just the voice of Cynthia Nunes. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. I'm going to go ahead. George, Syrup, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, City Manager. Good evening, Hayward Police Department. First, I just wanted to make a request. I'd like to see somewhere along the line stats on the criminals that are running from other cities into Hayward. And I'd like to understand as well how that might have changed over time. I hear that referenced a lot, and I would appreciate some more insight into that. I just wanted to make a quick comment and a question around community oversight. What I'm hearing from a lot of these comments is a lack of trust. I understand that the police department believes that they have a job to do, and other community members are concerned that they're going to be entering that job unarmed or underarmed. And, I think that's a valid concern, but underlying all of this is an issue of trust. And from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I've spoken to a few members of CAP, and I think some questions that came up during your interview were about your support for an independent, not community advisory panel because it wasn't created at the time, but community oversight panel. I would personally feel more comfortable if I knew that there was a body of appointed residents that had the ability to make decisions on behalf of the community about policies such as these, because I think a lot of the issue, especially for folks that were directly impacted by police violence or had their relatives murdered by the police, would feel more comfortable knowing that the police weren't policing themselves, but that there was an independent body that was charged with reviewing policies or investigations. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what a community oversight model might look like for the Hayward Police Department, and your thoughts on what it would look like to implement that. Thank you.
I think you have the ultimate oversight body with our city council. They're extremely active, they're receptive, and they listen to the folks that call in, and regardless of where they're calling from, where they reside, they listen to them and they take those. And remember, everything we have, our city council has the power and authority to take those tools away if they're misused. That's first and foremost. And I would always say, look to a lot of cities that have the things you just mentioned. And I will guarantee you that they don't have the level of accountability that you see in the city of Hayward. And as far as the CAP goes, they're an advisory committee. And routinely, the city council will say, before we implement this, we want you to take it to them and have discussions with them, which we do. And as someone stated earlier about their disapproval of the drone program, that's absolutely not what happened when it was taken to the CAP. The vast majority of folks were for us having the drone program. So, I think right now, the city of Hayward is doing a phenomenal job, as evidenced by the long conversations we're having. It took us 3 years to get drones. There's a lot of agencies that have had a history and other issues that got them upon immediately requesting them. This was a long, thoughtful process. We had to jump through a lot of hoops that sometimes was extremely frustrating, but I understood. And there is no green lighting in the city of Hayward going on. I've lived here since 1993. When I retire, eventually, I'm going to continue to live here. So I want to make sure it's the best policing going on, because, at some point I'm going to be driving through this city as a non-sworn retiree, to make sure that when I engage our police department, I get the fair treatment that every community member should be afforded. So right now, I think you have the ultimate accountability. You have the CALEA process, which in a single digit percentages the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the nation participate in. Hayward is one of them. You also have, like I said, an active city council, and you have a city manager who has her finger on the pulse that's constantly getting out and speaking with the groups, no matter what their views are, to find out and get a cross section of what people believe should be occurring in the city, and specifically with regards to policing. This transparency we're seeing now has never been greater. The dialogue we're having, the talks we're having. Do I wish we could go out and just sometimes do our job? Absolutely. But I love the fact that we're able now to bring more people into the fold to see what we actually do. And quite frankly, to render opinions about better ways to do it. So we're listening tonight, not just as a checkbox, but as an idea. The last time we brought the policy, it was kind of a bare bones policy. There were a lot of suggestions, and the policy grew tremendously from those suggestions. So we are listening to what people are asking for in these policies. And I think Hayward should be a model for other folks, how active our community is. And like everybody that came on tonight, pro and con, and having issues with the police department and loving the police department, we listen to it all. We take it in, we discuss it internally, and our policies are not done in a vacuum anymore. We do them with input from the community.
Great. Thank you for that response. I will just want to add one quick thing. When you have city council members that are receiving money from Police Officers Association, I think that calls into question again, that issue of trust. And so I do hope that, we can continue to investigate the conversation around independent oversight, because I personally would see that as a conflict of interest, just knowing how politics works. But I do appreciate your response, and I do appreciate this dialogue being held. It's nice to be able to have a back and forth and not just have to sit behind the dais. And the last thing I'll end on is TJ, great logo. I'm loving to see Hayward Concerned Citizens develop their design game a little bit. Thank you.
And thank you, and please stay engaged.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question about the equipment list. Will HPD update the equipment list to include the cost for routine maintenance and officer training?
Yes, we will. The one that's up on the website right now is a draft document. There is a fiscal impact section that's listed on it, but providing training for each piece of equipment is one of the requirements. So we'll be doing that before we go back to council.
Great. Thank you. And that, I'm assuming, will also include in the annual report as well. Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to go back over to verbal comments again. There's a lot of comments that are being made in the Q&A. They're not questions. And so I just want to, if folks want to see that dialogue. And again, every comment that is in here will become part of the transcript from tonight's meeting, and that'll go on the website along with the recording from tonight's meeting. So I just want to reassure folks that the comments that people are making will not be lost as well. Okay, Alexis Villalobos, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My comment and question is about the oversight aspect. So I had asked earlier in the text questions about oversight, and I think similar to some of the questions just asked by George and others, I think the response has been that like the city council would be the accountability body. The way it's going to play out, I feel like the way it's right now, like the minimum requirement based on this policy is that like once a year, this policy, like the written policy, is going to be, presented to the council maybe like one night. They'll have like maybe like a week with the package to review it or something. I don't know how that works, but what I'm really interested in is if there could be an accountability board that's independent, something that's working and meeting throughout the year that can look at case by case situations where there might be an issue or a question of misconduct or an issue or a question of breaking this policy. I'm not saying like, I'm saying like if we all agree here, if the police department, if the city manager's office, if council agrees this policy is good and we agree with it and we want it, then we should enforce it. And I think that there should be an independent review board or something of the sorts that can actually look at the facts of the use of this when something is used. And it's not to say when something's fired, it's to say when something's brought out, when something was used in a car, when something was pointed at somebody, when it was deployed, as Jonathan said. to make sure if there's any question about this policy being broken, that we can look at it and make recommendations to the council to ultimately make decisions about whether or not there's compliance here, whether, or make recommendations to a city manager about whether there needs to be disciplinary action or personnel actions, because under our charter that goes under the city manager. But I do think that there should be an independent review board that meets throughout the year, that can look at case by case situations, can look at and make recommendations based on situations like that. And there's other cities that do it in the Bay Area, other cities across the country that do it. And I'm wondering from City Manager McAdoo, if that's something that you'd be open to recommending to the city council, a program like that, where we can have some independent review board for any sort of like police misconduct, to just make sure that policies are being met, the ones that you are all promising to be making.
So I think there's a couple things I want to respond to in that. One of the things that when we did the policy innovation workshops last year, one of the suggestions that came out of that was an independent sort of complaint mechanism for the police department. And so we have started researching that, looking at what other cities do around that. And, you know, I think that gets to how do we sort of take those complaints and the investigation of those complaints out of the police department and provide some independent review of those. I think we're looking at different options, and we'll be coming back to the council to talk to that. I will just continue to express my own concern about just given the provisions of the charter, given the provisions of state law that govern police officer discipline and personnel matters. We would be challenged to have an independent board that would review those types of things. And so I think where my commitment to the community is, when there is if there's an incident that occurs, is to look at whether, it feels like it needs someone outside of the police department to review it. It is always within my purview to say, we should hire someone other than the internal affairs group that has the capability to be able to review the incident, the technical knowledge, and to be able to make recommendations to the chief and I on potential discipline for officers. So that is always within our purview, and I think the chief and I have committed to each other that is something that we will both look at as incidents occur. And I think for AB 481. My expectation is that each year we'll report on the incidents that occur. And if there's one that causes me concern, causes the chief concern, causes the council concern, we could launch, a review of that particular incident. So I think those are just some of my thoughts on it. We haven't, really talked about making a proposal to council around those types of things, but those are just some of my initial thoughts and observations.
When it comes to
And
like
Kelly,
state
can I also
law
add
and-
this for clarity, Alexis? Hayward is one of the cities that got in the front of this thing. We don't just document and investigate uses of force. We also investigate and document show of force. So to your point, if something is pointed or deployed, then there's an investigation triggered by the use or deployment or threat of that particular tool. So unlike some other cities, we look at all aspects. So we don't just not if it's used, but if it's deployed and displayed, then we also investigate those as well.
Yeah, and then so in terms of state law and stuff, there's other examples of cities that have done it, and I'm sure they aren't violating laws. So maybe having some of those, looking into some of those and showing council the options about doing this. I just think that right now, based on the policy as it's written and other police conduct policies, its review is typically gone to sergeants or captains or in like internal review or just within City Hall and city staff itself. And I think what the community is really interested in is if we can have an independent review board that meets publicly, that can make even just recommendations, so that you're not, just to respect the charter and respect state law, to make recommendations to say that, as an independent review board, we found this very questionable, or this looks really bad, or this shows like a loophole in the policy that needs to be fixed. So that's the kind of thing that I think that people are really interested in and would love to see some information provided to the council at a future meeting.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. I appreciate those comments a lot. And we'll continue to think about it and look at the different models. And I think as we look at that independent sort of complaint liaison role that came up in the policy innovation workshop, that may give us some additional insights. Cynthia, I just wanted to say, I see your question about HPD and staff considering oversight with decision-making power. And I think we're answering it here live in the questions. I just wanted to say that I see that particular question. How many active members are left on CAP? And then how many of those members are officers or related to officers?
I get that question a lot because when I first when I was first lobbying for the job of Hayward's chief, my wife applied for and was accepted to the CAP. My first duty upon being appointed to the chief, unfortunately, was having to fire her from the CAP because it was obviously a
She actually resigned before you fired her. Let's be fair.
It just sounded better.
Yeah.
No, it was a dual deal. But I know that there is a member of CAP that has a husband who was in law enforcement. I don't know if he still is. The original members are still there, and that's a question that's coming up soon about refreshing the CAP. But in my opinion, they have not been able to do their full functions because of COVID. The main function they had was to go out to the community and let them know things that we're doing in the police department and get feedback on those particular things. But obviously with the pandemic and the shutdown, they were not able to fulfill their mission or accomplishment. They were impaneled before I was onboarded, before I became chief. They were selected by then Chief Mark Calder and members of city council and city manager. And it's a really robust group. There's a lot of folks that have strong opinions about law enforcement, pro and con, and which I like. I like diversity of thought. It's the only way we're really going to sit down and really hash these things out. They've had a lot of input into policies, decisions that we've had. And quite frankly, one of the things the city council has mandated we do is to go back to them with any major policy changes or major equipment requests. They want us to go through the CAP first. We sit down, there's constructive dialogue, and there's been changes to policy made based on recommendations from CAP. And so I think CAP is a great vehicle for the city of Hayward. I think now that things are opening up and continue to open up more, I think you're going to see CAP get out there a little bit more and be more robust in the community with regards to getting feedback in the community in a forum that can go longer than this and be in person. And they can be in some of the neighborhoods, the affected neighborhoods of some of these policies that we're going to enact that say that they feel like they're going to be disproportionately impacted by what we do. And that feedback can come back to us and we can have constructive input from the CAP. So to answer your question, the original members are still impaneled and the questions come up a few times about their tenure and about a change. And so that's something that we will be looking to explore in the near future.
I think there's about 10 to 15 members on the CAP. Is that how many? I can't remember the exact number.
Originally there were 12.
Yeah.
Originally there were 12.
And Cynthia asked another question about when the last time they met. I think it was just recently. Did you guys bring the policy draft to them to take a look at?
We did. We meet quarterly, but there's always things that pop up that we may call a special meeting. We also routinely send things out to them so that they're aware of them. Like if we have a draft policy, we'll send it to all CAP members for input, even if there's not a meeting. So we routinely contact or reach out to the CAP if there's something pressing. If there's an officer involved shooting, God forbid, or something that happens, we will. Last year, I think it was last year, we really called on them a lot, and appreciate the service and the fact that they stood tall and answered the call. But we meet quarterly now. That was the original plan, was to meet quarterly, and now we've finally been able to jump on that schedule and intend to keep it through 2022.
Great. The question about, is Hayward planning to host another policy innovation workshop? If so, when? That was a specific effort that was done in response to calls from the community, the city council and others to look at better and more effective ways to respond to mental health crises and to also help to reimagine public safety in our community and help people feel safe. We do that process. The city uses a lot internally for how we look at a variety of our different problems and challenges that come up. But I'm glad that maybe it sounds like you thought it was useful and want us to continue doing that kind of community engagement work. And I think we'll try to find more ways to do that going forward. Okay, another technical question about the carbine rifles. Are these semi-automatic only or selective fire? Would these be classified as assault rifles based on California law?
So a majority of the carbine rifles that we have are semi-automatic only. The ones that are in the patrol cars in the field as a matter of routine are semi-auto only. We do have some that are select fire. Those are assigned to members of our SWAT team and can be only used, they have to get authorization from the team commander, who's a lieutenant, to have them in that mode. The other question was, would they be classified as assault weapons under California law? They would. They're with the department based on a law enforcement exception.
Thanks, Deputy Chief. Again, I know there's a lot of commentary in I'm just trying to see if I'm missing very specific questions. And then there's a question about the CAP meetings being on Zoom too. I think there was an intent that occasionally to have the CAP meetings be open to the public when there are specific topics. So I think that's something we can think about what maybe periodically having the CAP meetings, on Zoom so that community members can engage like what we did this evening. Okay, I am not seeing. Okay, and there's just a comment about the CAP website and none of the information is on there. And if we could outline, just, update that website. So we should probably look at that and see if we can update the website about the CAP.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna do one last call for public comments, raising hands. Any last questions in the Q&A? I really appreciate everyone's feedback. And again, our next community meeting on this topic is going to be on Monday, June 6th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. It'll be just the same exact format, same presentation. I think if we make any additional changes to the policy, we may try to post some revisions or make those more evident before that meeting. And then we talked about the community open house on Saturday, June 11th. That's from 9 a.m. to noon in person at the downtown station on Main Street, right across Main Street and C Street, right across from Fire Station 1. We'll have all of most of the equipment available for people to view, people to walk on the vehicles, to look at things. So we encourage anyone to come to that community open house. And we'll also, I think if you registered for the webinar tonight and provided an email address, we'll try to provide additional follow-up information and send out dates of when upcoming meetings are happening at the City Council and the Council Infrastructure Committee. So
Kelly, before we close out, can I say something real fast? I just want to thank the community members for coming out tonight. I want to thank the folks that support the Hayward Police Department. You are phenomenal. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank the folks that challenge us. You make us better. There's always going to be room for improvement. Nobody's perfect. And we listen, and trust me, it's not falling on deaf ears. We are definitely a better agency for it. And we're going to continue to grow and get better. And the participation is off the hook. It's great. It's fantastic. And most importantly of all, it's welcomed. So I appreciate, like I said, the supporters and the folks that challenge us. It can only make us better. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Chief, and thanks, Deputy Chief. And again, I also want to echo the thanks for everyone who came and spoke and asked questions and continue to challenge us to do better in service to our community. So I really appreciate it and hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thanks, Deputy Chief Matthew. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you.